Okay, so briefly just to recap, because now I realize it's on my slides too. Time of the quizzes. If you want to have more time with the quiz and want to take a pencil paper, we can get that done. Lab today is online if you haven't done it yet. If you have done it, you just chill. Lab next week is the exam, and then midterm grades are going in today.
The lab exam online?
It has to be, yes. I should write it. Okay, so on to the cortex, right? We were on the cortex. We're currently looking at the cerebral cortex. Everyone calls the cortex, your book calls it the cerebral cortex because there are cortexes other places, like the kidneys, right? The cerebral cortex, it's that like bark outside part of it, and there are a couple important areas. There are lots of important areas, but the big important areas are going to be the motor areas. So as we look up here, you can see kind of near the front, not like the very, very front, but up near the front, you've got here in reddish pink, those are the motor areas. They're in charge of voluntary movement. Sparse again, we're right about here. They're going to control movement, and different parts control different parts of the body. So you'll see pictures that look like this. Have you ever seen these before? It's called homunculus. It's a little cartoon person put up against the cortex. Right, like there's not really a face here, right? But what this is showing is this specific part of the cortex, that is sending signals out to this particular part of your face, right? A little bit farther along, sending a little bit up. It's located by brain region. So you'll notice areas of the body that are close to each other typically are mapped next to each other, right? So your hand is mapped right down here. Your wrist is temporally close to it. Do you see that? A lot of these studies were done back in like the 50s by a guy named Wilder Penfield, which is a cool name, by the way. This Canadian neuroscientist. What he had this basically like this zoo. Most experiments would not pass ethical review boards today. But basically he had these animals, and he'd go in and he'd have it so their brain was exposed. You can do that as long as you keep it like clean. And he'd go in and he'd just like poke one part and see what they moved. And so he'd just go around and just systematically went through, if I poke here, what happens? Poke here, what happens? Poke here, what happens? But yeah, this map holds so humans have this map as well. And the primary motor cortex is controlling movement, right? We're cool with that as a concept. There's some helpful other areas. If we look up here, so we've got the primary motor cortex. There's also this stuff that's pink right in front of it. I mean, it's not color-coded in the actual brain. The premotor cortex is called pre because it's in front of it, it's towards the front. It's going to help plan movement. If you have some sort of voluntary action that depends on sensory feedback, so let's say you're juggling, or you're, pogo sticking, or you're responding to somebody throwing you a ball, right? Like you've learned that you're responding to stimulus rather than just sitting there and being like, I want to wave my hand. You're trying to, have you ever seen neurologists, if you did a neurology test, do they like touch your nose, touch a spot, touch your nose, touch a spot? If you're responding to that and somebody's moving, your premotor cortex is helping you plan that. Okay, so movement, planning movement, figuring out where we can go next. You also have, so for other motor regions, you also have this part, it's called Broca's area. It's planning the movement for speech. Alright? And then you also have the frontal eye fields, which are controlling eye movements. So you might know if you're like driving, even as you're moving, you can keep your eyes fixed and you can track things. Right? Like your eyes are under voluntary control, but you probably don't have to like be thinking about tracking with your eyes to like read the stop signs and stuff. Your brain just has got this covered for you. We're okay with this? Motor control areas. The part that actually sends the signal saying move. The part that plans it. The part that controls the movement of speech. And then the part that controls the frontal eye fields right here. Questions, comments? We're cool with that? When we get to speech, we're actually going to see Broca's area. Have people seen this before? Oh, it's weird. It's good. It's interesting. It is so weird. Okay. So that's the motor part. The other part are the sensory areas. So you've got motor stuff going out. Again, we're all still just in cortex. You then have sensory areas of the cortex. So some of the cortex is going to have information feeding in. Lots of different types of sensation. We're going to go through them all. Yeah. So the primary somatosensory cortex, it's right here in blue. You know, right up here is the motor, right back here is the somatosensory cortex. It's receiving sensory information from, like, basically your skin. So your skin, also from your joints, tendons. You'll also get it from stretch receptors in your muscles. This is how, even if you're closing your eyes, you should still know where most of your body is, right? Also, as spiders crawl across your arms, or you pet a kitten or whatever, you should be able to receive that sensation coming in. Or cool with that? You'll see a picture. I like this picture, this one's in your book. This right here, so, okay, we're looking down at the brain. The eyeballs are up here, that's the back of the head. This red band, that was the motor, right? And up here, near the very top, it's responding, it's sending signals out for the trunk, arm, then as you get to the sides toward the face, right? That's for motor. For sensation, there's a really similar map. It's not perfectly the same, but it's very similar. For sensation, it's just posterior to the motor map. You've got sensation spread out like this. One thing to note, do you notice how, like, what areas are dramatically overrepresented in motor map? Like to scale, they're hogging more than you expect. It's like, okay, so like, if the face is this big on the real person relative to the size of everything else, that's weirdly disproportionate, right? What this means is there's a lot of brain area controlled to the motor, dedicated to the motor control of the face, right? You need to make smiles, you need to frown, you need to raise one eyebrow, right? There's not a lot of motor control you need to do for your shoulder. Like, there's some, but not anywhere near the amount your face has going on, right? So it gets less physical brain space. Fair enough? Sensation has a similar deal. The hands are really overrepresented, as they are for motor too. There's a lot of brain space devoted to sensation on your face. Places that you're sensitive, right? So like your fingers get a lot. You'll also notice there's a lot devoted to tongue, to your gums. You don't see that over here so much, right? If the dentist pokes you and is like, do you floss? You're like, yes, I floss, but don't poke so hard, right? You've got sensation being read in here. Questions? This sets up something called referred pain. Has anybody ever heard of that before? Yeah. Do you want to tell us about it?
It's like you feel pain somewhere else where actually, which is different from where like you hold it.
Yeah, and you do, and you're not lying, right? So people come into the doc, and they know they're having a heart attack because they know where their heart is, and it hurts like a lot. And they've seen the public service announcements of like, if you're having a heart attack, act quickly, right? They come in, they know they're having a heart attack, and so the doc runs the test and is like, Good news and bad news. Good news, no heart attack. Bad news, we're taking out your gallbladder. And they're like, I want to see your medical degree because I'm not sure where the gallbladder is exactly, but I know that's not where I'm hurting, right? What happens is, um, the sensory areas of the brain, sometimes signals get a little bit funky. So you've got basically the innards being mapped right here, and the spot where the heart maps for sensation, and the spot, for instance, where the gallbladder maps for sensation, they're right next to each other in the brain. So in the body, they're not next to each other at all, but the brain, having one send signals in, sometimes gets read as a slightly different area. Okay with this? If you want to try it yourself, you can put your elbow in cold water, and a little while later, your fingers will hurt. Like, but you won't hurt. It won't hurt like so. So your elbow hurts. You're like, okay, that's cold. It doesn't hurt right here so much. It hurts in your fingers because your brain's like, okay, I'm getting pain in. I'm not reading a whole lot of sensation for my forearm. Like you get some, but I'm pretty sure it's happening in my hand. Anyways, so that's there. Referred pain is weird. So far we've had motor areas, right, sending signals out to move. Sensory areas, reading in signals of like, this is what things are feeling like. Okay? Cool with that? Right behind all of them, so we're going back. Motor, right, premotor, primary motor, sensory areas. Behind that, we have what's called association cortex. This is putting together, so motor cortex is make the actual movement. Premotor cortex is planning that movement. Somatosensory cortex, primary somatosensory cortex, is what sensations are feeding in. Somatosensory association cortex is the next step past that. It's like, okay, so I'm getting the sensation in about fuzzy and small. I'm putting both fuzzy and small together in the picture instead of each of those being discrete. All right, so it's that next step beyond that. We're cool with this? Okay, so that between planning motor movements, executing motor movements, reading in somatosensory information, kind of interpreting somatosensory information, that covers a lot of the cortex. There are a few other things we still need though. What sensations have we missed? So we've got motor movement set. We have feeling stuff, feeling your innards, feeling things on your skin. What are we missing? Smell, taste, hearing, sight. Is everyone cool with this? We're missing those ones? The brain has spots for them. Speaking of spots for them, have you seen in comics when whatever comic character gets hit in the back of the head and they see spots? I'm really hoping the answer is no. Has anybody ever actually been hit on the back of the head hard? Do you see spots?
Well, like, I laid in back because I was playing soccer, but...
Did you see anything weird?
Yeah, a little bit.
Like flashes?
Not really spots, like, it just got darker.
And then next thing you know, people are like, it's gonna be okay. You know, people leave with it's gonna be okay. You're like, ooh, bad.
Yeah, I walked off the field, that was fine.
I'm glad you're good. So, I'm terrible at soccer. Like, not good at soccer, but as a kid I did play it because, like, why not, right? Where was I going with this story? Alright, the first time I, like, tried to actually hit a ball, like, you see people do it, and you're like, that looks easy. It's like hitting a beach ball. It is not. It's like hitting a bowling ball. You're like, oh, I was not expecting that. Maybe not. Anyways, okay, so if you get hit in the back of the head, it does do weird things to your vision, whether it makes it go dark, whether it makes it flash. Conveniently, the reason this is happening is the visual areas of the brain are located right back there. Which personally is an odd organization because you've got your eyes in the front. Those optic nerves run all the way to the very back. The primary visual cortex, all these areas are organized as primary region that does the actual, like, the most basic of the function, and then the association region that helps out. So primary somatosensory, what somatosensory information do we have? Association, what does this mean? Primary visual, it comes in as like lines and colors, right? And then the visual association area beyond it is going to interpret that. So you can see faces or something, right? Because faces just by themselves, you're getting lines and colors and shapes. The association area is like, okay, who is that? We okay with this? And there's some specific deficits that, like, if, say, the visual association area is gone, people can describe stuff. You hand them some picture, or sorry, you hand them some item, and they're like, okay, you know, it's cylindrical, it's black, it's got a point at the tip, and you say, what is it? And they're like, I have no idea. I can describe it, but I can't put the pieces together into what it means. So far, so good? Visual association areas. Visual areas. Hearing has another cortical region. This one's actually located close to where the input's coming in. So we see it here in dark blue is the primary auditory cortex. Light blue here is the auditory association cortex. Primary. Sound information's coming in. Your brain reads that in as pitch, loudness, and where is it coming from. Which is actually pretty easy to do in the horizontal plane. Like you can, if your phone goes off, you can know which side it's coming from typically. But it's really hard to do in the height direction. I have things to explain if people are ever interested. And then the auditory association region is the same idea as all the other ones, right? Where you've got this information coming in. But what does this mean? I hear the loudness, I hear the pitch, I hear the location, but now I recognize it as somebody's voice. We're okay? You'll notice some people are better at this than others. I mean, some people are better at all these things than others. Some people can't distinguish pitch quite so well. Some people can. If we're not talking about problems of the ear, there can actually be deafness or blindness or any other problems that can happen in the brain. So you can be cortically deaf, where you can't hear because of a cortical problem, even though the ear itself has all the parts it needs. Are we okay with that? See how that works? Not last, but this one's often forgotten. There's the vestibular cortex. It's hard to see because you see this foldy in bit, right? It's there deep. It's right next to where the auditory cortex is, so the auditory cortex is right here. Like, in and underneath, we have the vestibular cortex, and that's basically your balance. So, how you know where you are in space. Somatosensory information telling you what you're feeling in space. Vestibular system is how you know where you're at. Yeah. Do people want to, nobody here was in neuroscience, right? Do people want to do a quick and kind of terrible mess around with your vestibular system? It involves, okay, so what it involves, let me explain briefly. I should have brought my phone. If you spin around and get dizzy, whee, right? And then you stop, and someone shines a light in your eyes, it's very hard to stay standing up. Does anybody want to try it? It's cool. It doesn't hurt, but it makes you feel weird. No? You want to try it?
Why not?
Bro, okay. So like you don't like hit the ground, but you're not like prone to seizures, right?
What?
Are you prone to seizures or anything? Oh,
I hope not.
good. Does somebody? We'll find out. No, we won't. It's not so bad. I spent my childhood doing this. I did many other things to do in my life. But it wasn't until neuroscience I figured out why. So we're gonna need you to come here. I'm gonna turn off the lights. We're gonna get you dizzy. Once you're dizzy, you're gonna stop. We'll shine a flashlight in your eyes, and then you can describe the class.
Right now?
Yeah. Right? You could? Cool. Does somebody have a flashlight on their phone? Do you mind being the shine in his eyes? So it's it's for science and learning. So if you go like this, it gets you dizzy faster. And let me turn off the lights because it makes it easier.
A lot of mass hitting the ground if I fall.
Okay.
How long do I have to spend?
Just until you're dizzy but still on your feet. So sorry. It's a boring class otherwise. Go for it. And do you have your flashlight ready just to like. Okay, good?
Sure.
Okay. You okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, weird, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm making that.
I feel like I'm at bottomless. This one and that one.
Okay. I realized there was more time in. Well, it's weird, right?
We should do that at lab today. Everyone get on one of those stools and spin them really quick.
Yeah. Oh, so. Am I missing the light?
That makes it easier to see.
Makes it easier to see. Are we okay with this? Yeah. There's. So, sorry, people who missed it. Today's lab were boring because I was kind of thinking that we weren't even going to be in school at this point in the semester. I'm telling you, I need more trust in the world. Like, I haven't brought in my houseplants. I usually bring in like houseplants, keep it alive. Here, I'm like, nope. Anyway, so a lot of people already did the lab thing. But yeah, okay, so Brody spins around, lights in your eye. Whew. Briefly, what's happening? Your vestibular cortex is trying really, really hard to read information from where you are in space, right? And it's reading in from your ears, right? Well, if you get dizzy, you kind of swamp the signal, right? Just because no new information is coming in, you just get this kind of swirling information. So then your brain is using visual information to keep you up, right? So you're looking at like, without even noticing it, you're looking at which side's up so you can visually keep yourself up even though your vestibular cortex is like, can't help you out. Then if you get the light on you, now you suddenly have a lot of visual information, but your brain's like, whoa, I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, I felt like I was rocking back and forth this way, and then when the light came, I started rocking backwards.
Yeah. Anyways, it's interesting. Feel for a fun time for anybody. Okay. Thank you for being a good sport, by the way. I realized I pitched it like I didn't pitch it well. Okay, we're cool with vestibular cortex? Great. Olfactory cortex. And I'm sorry we don't have a normal lab year. Because I was going to have you like poke each other with pins in the lab if it was normal year, but that's very close to each other for this math semester one. Olfactory cortex is another one. It's there deep as well, so you have to like pry that temporal cortex open a tiny bit. It's doing smells. People ignore this one more than they ought to, but anybody, if you don't want to, have to. What's it like if you suddenly can't smell? Anybody who wants to.
So it's a little weird.
It's weird.
I didn't really notice, but then like I'm like, oh yeah, it's just like nothing, and then you can't taste very well.
Yeah.
It's just like texture.
Yeah.
Like,
Thanks. I appreciate it. People don't notice it until it's gone, and then people really notice it. And yeah, honestly, and I'm not recommending that you do this, if people lose smell permanently, they often feel really depressed. Because apparently, this one sounds creepy, you get used to smelling other people, amongst other things, and if you can't, you're like, feel kind of lonely. I guess, apparently, that's the idea. But also, whether it's smoke or food, and food's the big one, right? You just, yep, I guess it's squishy, but that's about it. Um, Smell is also one of the oldest, evolutionary speaking, senses that we've got. So, um, it's different from most of the rest of the senses. Most of the rest of the senses go through something called the thalamus, which is like the main input into the brain. They go to the thalamus. It's coming from the body, hits the thalamus, goes to the cortex. Smell doesn't. Smell can go right directly to the cortex. So it's lightning fast. Um, and it's also right next to the emotional parts of the brain. So smell and emotions are tied together more closely than you think. Um, like, you might smell something and suddenly you remember your kindergarten classroom. And like, you haven't been in your kindergarten classroom for years now. But like, you're there, and the emotions associated with that are there. So far, so good? And then there's taste, kind of right next to smell. Shouldn't surprise you. It's, oh, sorry. Ah! No, what is happening? I went to the end. I wasn't trying to go to the end. Don't freeze. Taste is right next to, oh my goodness sakes. Good grief. Where were we? Aha. Taste is next to smell. And then also, okay, so yeah, smells right in here. Then if you're sensing your viscera, like you sense that you have to pee, or your stomach's not feeling so good, it's deep there in insula as well. So those are the basic where sensations happening. Then the rest of the cortex, so we've got places where it's going to do motor, it's going to do places where you've got motor, you've got vision, you've got sight, you've got hearing, you've got smell, you've got taste, you've got touch, right? The other parts of the cortex are putting together many of those modalities. So you can have brain regions that are doing, I want to put together touch and smell. I want to put together sight and taste. Right? You want to put together different modalities. They're called multimodal association areas. And there are three main parts. Basically, the front part, the back part, and the side part. Um, Anterior association areas, posterior association areas, and then the limbic association areas. The anterior association areas, it's called the frontal cortex. It's like, if you had to pick one part that makes us human in the brain, go for the front. It's what does, personality a lot. It's what does reason and judgment. It's what helps you make good decisions. If you're trying to like hold an idea in your memory, if you're trying to hold multiple pieces of information and work on it all together, if you're trying to plan something out, frontal cortex is where you need to go. Have people heard about this before? The frontal cortex? Have you ever seen this picture before? I know! No, okay, clap. Okay, so, brief reason he's here because he's super famous. His name is Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker, 1800s. Apparently a really conscientious, hardworking, nice kind of guy, right? Did his job, he was really good at what he was doing, and his job was to, they're building this railroad, sorry, he'd put dynamite down the hole, tamp it down, back appropriately, light it, and go, right? But blasting through the stuff. Well, Do you want to watch the music video about him?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel weird about showing you certain things. I'm like, I don't know if you feel like this is a waste of your time, but I tell you the story otherwise. The story's actually, I checked, it's actually accurate. But music video or not, this person is like super famous because of what we learned about how the brain works.
Wednesday.
Hey Logan, do you mind closing the door because I feel bad about the friendly librarian who works right there.
Heard a song Wednesday.
Is that loud enough? Do you want louder? Okay.
This is a song that I wrote. It's about Phineas Gage. Oh, Phineas Gage was 25 years old in 1848. And he liked his job working at the railroad, but he had another face. He was passing life when something distracted him. And he forgot to put the tapping sand in. He shoved the tapping rod in the tiny little hole onto the blasting powder. And suddenly his entire left front lobe and turned into clam chowder. This is the story of Phineas Gage, who was stabbed in the brain. And once the frontal lobe has been destroyed, he could never go home again. A little while later, Phineas Gage was sitting on his bed. He told the doctor the damping rod had shot straight through his head. But the doctor could not believe what Phineas said. For if that were the case, he surely would be dead. But then Phineas had a coughing fit, and a teacup full of brains fell out of his head. And that was more than the doctor could explain. Phineas Gage, who was stabbed in the brain. And once the frontal lobe has been destroyed, you can never go home again. Well, the doctor told the family to prepare for Gage's death. Cause the one you take before your head gets stabbed is usually your last breath. And Phineas spent the next few months in bed. In and out of consciousness with the swelling in his head. But 8 months after the accident, he walked right down his stairs as if having lost a quarter of his brain and left in no worse for wear. Oh, this is the story of Phineas Gage, who was stabbed in the brain. And once the frontal lobe has been destroyed, you can never go home again. But unfortunately for Phineas, our story won't end there. The reason we still know his name is the strangest part of this affair. After his brain was scrambled, his friends and family said, "Oh, this is no longer Phineas. There's a new man here instead." And thus we know that operating on the brain need not cause death. And that what makes a person who he is not the heart or the head. This is the story of Phineas Gage, who was stabbed in the brain. And once the frontal lobe has been destroyed, you can never go home again. Oh, Phineas Gage was 37 years old when he finally made his way back to his home and family. Oh, he could tell the day of his death was finally creeping up on him. Cause he forgot to put the tamping sand in. It's common in these cases of severe head trauma. Seizures took their toll and put an end to his drama. Thanks to Catherine Lemon for helping me film that video. Lemon,
Okay, so now you've been educated. All's well. You did go down in history because, yeah, did you see this stick? It's metal. It's big. He was using it to ram this dynamite down, right? And hit the dynamite, and it came right back through. And like it said in the film. Oh, actually, I've read the doctor's notes on this, and it's like it was written in like 1848 or whatever. And the doc's notes sound super surprised if you can be 1800s formal writing surprised. He was like, basically, I showed up to look at the patient. He had a hole through his head. I didn't know what to do. He said it more fancily than this. Didn't know what to do, so I poured hot water down it, stuffed it full of clean cotton and said, good luck, basically. But yeah, he survived. He could still speak, he could still move, right? So motor areas were intact. He could still, with the eye that didn't get taken out, he could still see, right? Still talk, still move, still see. He couldn't do this whole, like, planning and not acting on sudden impulses. So if he thought just like, I should punch somebody, he just did, right? It made him challenging to live around. He lost his job, he got in fights, his family was like, I have no idea who you are, and you're kind of freaking us out. But yeah, frontal cortex, important for planning, and like, just because you're crabby, you can't just like bite people, right? So like, toddlers don't really have prefrontal cortex developed yet, they're still working on it. But you know how their like decision making still needs some like work, right? Yeah, prefrontal cortex is helping out with that. Questions about that? We're cool? Okay, so that's the front one. That's the prefrontal cortex or anterior association area, which we've got up here. We also have back over here. We've got the posterior association cortex. It's doing understanding patterns. So you've got information coming in from sight, you've got information coming in from hearing, you've got information coming in from just what you remember. So this is going to do things like being able to read, being able to understand speech, those kind of higher order things. It's not just one sensory information piece coming in, but it's putting a bunch together. Remember where you are in space. So like if you're going into the building, you make several turns, and then you know how to get out even if you go a different pathway, because you know where you are. Does that make sense? Some people are better at this than others, like they can take several turns and then still realize like, oh yeah, west is whichever way. Some people are not good at this. We're cool with this, posterior association areas. And then finally, this one, it's called the limbic association area. It's right around here in the middle of the brain. Still cortex, but now we're like deep and in. Historically, it was thought that this was like its own area. Research now is saying, for historical reasons, we'll keep calling it its own area. It's several distinct areas doing several distinct things, but it's basically going to do memory and emotion. We're cool with that? So we have every individual cortical area that's doing different things. We've got association areas that are doing many parts together. We specifically have the prefrontal cortex doing like reasoning and planning, the posterior association area doing patterns, and then the limbic association area doing memories. Right? That's vastly oversimplified, but that's the idea. Questions about that? That's a lot of the really interesting parts of the brain. In the next 20 minutes, we're going over the other parts, also important, also there. So, white matter, we've seen, right? You can, if you're just staining for the white matter tract, this is actually something called DTI, you can see so many connections. These white matter tracts are these myelinated fibers in big bundles. And you can see the different parts of the cortex talk to other parts of the cortex, right? And to deeper areas. So this part of the brain talks to its neighboring region on the other side, right? So like you can be symmetrical. Fibers run all over the place. There are lots of connections. They're going to be association fibers, which are going to be different parts of the same hemisphere. So this part can talk to this part can talk to this part. You can see those there. Let me make it right here. Commissural fibers are going to connect parts of the from like one side of the brain to the other across. So you can associate right next to each other, send it across both hemispheres of the brain. Or you can send it down. So you can say, okay, I want cortical information here. I want it to go down the spinal cord. Or I want the spinal cord information to come on up to the brain. Nothing too surprising there, hopefully, right? It's all super wired. It talks amongst itself and to the rest of the body. So far we've had the outside layer, the cortex, right? And some of that outside layer is even in that part that's folded in. So you've got the outside, some of it's folded in, but still outside part. There's also an inside part of the brain. And some of that's the ventricles, right, that were just the spaces. But a lot of it is this thing called the basal nuclei, basal ganglia. It's this inner part here. It's deep in the brain. We don't know as much about it as we do the cortical areas because the cortical areas are really easy to research. They're really easy to look at with, say, an EEG. Often injury takes out just very specific portions of it, so that's a fairly straightforward way to look at it. The basal ganglia, we know some about it, but we're still learning more. So it's thought to do a lot of things. We know it's important for movement. Parkinson's disease hammers the basal ganglia, like it just shoots it. It also plays a role in emotion. It seems to help regulate like repeated knowing movements like walking. It's supposed to provide kind of the feedback system for that. It's also going to help you not overshoot with movement. So Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease. Have people heard about Huntington's disease? That's also a disorder of the basal ganglia. So now we're looking down here. So we've got cortex, all this gray stuff. We have all the white matter. Basal ganglia is what we're looking at here deep. Do we see that? We're okay with that? Cortex out here, gray matter. Basal ganglia is gray matter too, but it's deep. And then these are the ventricles, the hollow spots. We're okay with that? While we're deep, you see this purple blob here, right in the center of the brain, basically. That's called the thalamus. The thalamus is this thing. It looks kind of like an egg, sort of. It's the hub of the brain. So, you know how when you're taking flights, wherever you are, there are a couple main hubs, so like Dallas-Fort Worth and Atlanta, Salt Lake City is another one, where like tons of flights come in and then they go out. We're cool with this? Chicago O'Hare? Okay, the thalamus is doing that for the brain. Sensory information comes in, and then the thalamus sends it to where it's supposed to. It kind of arranges it, edits it. It also acts as a filter, because there's tons of information that your brain just doesn't need to care about, and the thalamus is like, no. And it sends information out. It kind of mediates most sensation, except again for olfaction, which does not have to go through the thalamus. So far, so good? So we've got the thalamus there. Right above it, we've got the right below it, you got the thalamus, and then right below it, like hypothermia, like underneath the thalamus, you've got the hypothalamus. It's little. The hypothalamus is little, but super powerful. It's controlling the endocrine system. So, yeah, it's controlling the endocrine system. So it's controlling hormones sent in your body. Problems here are going to be problems with growth, any sort of internal regulation thing. I have a really, really long list. This is a list. Autonomic nervous system, right? So blood pressure, heart rate, stuff moving through your digestive tract, pupil dilation, It's also going to be responsible for the physical response to motion. So, yeah, it's playing a role in fear, it's playing a role in romantic attraction, it's playing a role in biological rhythms. It's gonna be in charge of temperature regulation. It's gonna be a response to hunger. It's gonna do water balance. Like if you're thirsty, it's gonna play a role in sleep-wake cycles. It's bossing around a lot. The mnemonic that's here is F's. So fear, fighting, feeding, fleeing, fun, fever, reproductive behaviors, etc. Everyone's with me here? Great. We're cool with hypothalamus? Briefly. Then there's the epithalamus. It basically does sleep. It probably does other things, but for what we know now, it basically does sleep. So far, so good? Let me see how we're doing on time. I did take some slides down. Oh my goodness. We're not getting through all of them, and that's okay. I think it'd be better for you to know things well than to know lots of things poorly. Is that fair? With that then, how do you feel about wasting another 2 minutes with another YouTube video I found? Okay, wasting video time? Not wasting time, you're gonna learn something. So the next portion is the brainstem, and online people, these are the videos that are linked in the slides. So neuroanatomy as sung by Pinky and the Brain. Is that too loud?
Pinky and the brain.
And now the part of the brain performed by the brain.
Yes. Neocortex, frontal lobe, hippocampus, neural node, right hemisphere, pons and cortex, visual.
It's actually right, by the way.
Left hemisphere, cerebellum left, cerebellum right, synapse, hypothalamus, striatum dendrite. Axon fibers, matter gray, central tegmental pathway, temporal lobe, white core matter, forebrain skull, central fissure, cord spinal, parietal, diameter, meningeal vein, medulla oblongata and lobe limbic, microelectrodes, the brain. That ought to keep the little squirts happy. Yeah.
Yay. Okay, so this is for the brainstem. Also, again, those parts are right, so if you're trying to remember where things are, feel free to sing along. Brainstem, have you ever heard of somebody, so you've heard people who've had like strokes, right? Or damage, and like sometimes people's visual areas get damaged, sometimes motor areas get damaged, they're having a hard time moving, right? Ever heard of somebody who's had a brainstem stroke? No, you've not? Okay. Ever even heard of like brainstem damage? Probably not. Do you know what brainstem damage is typically called? Death. It's normally called death. Okay? Your brainstem, you don't hear about getting hurt because what you hear about is people dying. Right? Other areas, like if your visual cortex goes and you can't see, that's sad. If the brainstem goes, you don't survive. It's going to control those autonomic behaviors necessary for survival, and it's also going to connect the higher and the lower neural areas, right? So it's doing two main things. So we're looking at up through here. So now we're looking at the brain upside down, right? You've got the spinal cord coming in, and then this chunk right here is what we're looking at right now. So several parts. We've got, okay, so we have the thalamus right here in purple. Right underneath it we have the midbrain. You can see it right here, right? And then you're going to see the lumpy part, and then you're going to see this chubby part. So midbrain, it's going to be involved, most of connecting things, but it's also going to be involved in pain. Pons are this next bit down, they're green. It's going to be helping send signals between the brainstem and the spinal cord, and also between the motor cortex and the cerebellum. Cerebellum's this blob back here. So the pons are connecting there to the cerebellum. And then you've got the medulla oblongata, if you want it to be, this little bit here. It's where the spinal cord and the brain become one. And that's the anatomy right here. We're looking at right here. Right? Right through there. We've got the midbrain. We've got the pons. You can see the lump. We've got the medulla, and now we're in spinal cord. Through here, through this brainstem, you're going to drain cerebrospinal fluid. This is just another slide picture of it that you cut through. The medulla is the one we're going to care about right now. It's playing a lot with the hypothalamus. It's going to control heartbeat. It's going to control blood pressure. It's going to control breathing. It's also going to control other miscellaneous things like vomiting, hiccuping, swallowing, coughing, sneezing, those kinds of things. We're good? The midbrain, it's there, it's old, it's important, it's there, it's controlling a lot of those like deeply embedded responses. It's controlling, like the pons are controlling, say, urination, right? So like even infants, you don't have to learn how to pee, how to like relax certain muscles, right? Like it's deep. Question about the brainstem? They had that song stuck in my head all day. Coming off of the brainstem back into your brain there is the cerebellum. It's surprisingly big. It's about 10% of your brain mass. It's actually really pretty good sized. It's going to be doing balance amongst other things. It's helping with learned movement. It's helping with, say, if you've learned to be afraid of some signal and then you're going to have a physical response to that. It's processing a bunch of stuff. The book basically says it does learned motor movement. It does other things too, but learned motor movement is a pretty good bet. You see it right here? It's called the cerebellum. It means beautiful little brain. Right? So most of the cortex is up here. We've got brainstem right here. Here's the pons, right? Cerebellum right off there. And then you can look at it sideways too. We're good? I'm going to skip this. It does motor activity. Okay, so now we have all the chunks, all the different chunks of the brain. We've seen all the chunks. You protect it, so that's good. You've got what are called meninges. They're going to cover and protect the brain, and the central nervous system. They also do this in the spinal cord. They're going to wrap around this brain. They're going to help. You have several layers. So starting at the top, right? You've got your skin, you've got periosteum, you've got bone. So we're here to through the skull, okay? Then you have what's called dura mater. It's hard. It's this tough fibrous connective tissue, right? You don't want anything touching your brain, so you've got dura mater over it. Matter means mother. It means hard mother is what it technically means, but whatever. It's protecting your brain. It's great. The next layer down, so we've got dura mater, comes a couple layers, but tough, fibrous. Underneath that, you've got what's called arachnoid matter. Does anybody know what like arachnophobia is? Arachnid? What is it? Spiders, yeah. So arachnids are spiders. Do you see how it looks spider-webby? It's called arachnoid matter because it's this middle layer and it's got spider-webby looking things. It's going to have, so you've got this tough outside, almost saran wrap layer. Then you've got this like spider-webby layer that's going to have cerebrospinal fluid that's able to like swoosh around it, right? That middle layer. And then next, like physically touching, clinging to the actual brain, you've got pia mater, which is super delicate. So here in the arachnoid matter, you've got blood vessels running through it. Pia mater is the close, tight covering. It's super delicate, right up against the brain itself. More okay with this? You got these three wrappings for the brain, and that's what those are. If you hear of meningitis, that's when the meninges get inflamed. It's a bad deal. Meningitis is when meninges get inflamed. Encephalitis is when the brain itself gets inflamed. That does not go well, right? Like I realize you're not physicians, but if you're just looking at that, you know that's not good. That's very bad. Sometimes people do that with traumatic brain injuries. Yeah, I think I got rid of those slides. I had slides, and I got rid of them. We're going to go on a tangent here because it's interesting. There are skulls from like hundreds of years BC that you can see where there was a hole cut in the brain to relieve pressure, which isn't a big deal by itself, except it's been healed over. So you know they did brain surgery and then they got better. It's called trepanation. It actually kind of works. Like don't do it yourself, but often traumatic brain injury, people get hit hard. Problem is, there's the skull. The skull's great normally. It protects your brain, helps amongst other things. But if you say pour a ton of blood into the brain and there's nowhere for it to go, it squashes the brain tissue up against the skull and like kills it just because it squashes it hard. So drilling little tiny holes in the brain just to like relieve pressure actually helps. Again, don't do this yourself. Don't be like, well, no. But it actually does help and people recover once the swelling goes down. Yeah. Anyways. We're good? We've got the coverings of this. 10 minutes? We'll cover a couple things in 10 minutes. So you've got the wraps around the brain. You have this fluid, this cerebrospinal fluid, that's coating the whole system. It's helpful because it's going to provide what's called a liquid cushion around the brain. So you have the skull, you've got the brain. You also have, you know how water doesn't compress well? Like if you ever belly flop onto it, it doesn't like squash, right? Like belly flopping onto water hurts more than belly flopping onto like a mattress, right? Water doesn't compress well. So if you've got water there in your head, even if you shake your head back and forth, your brain doesn't bang up against your skull, right? It does bang up against your skull though if you're like boxing or getting tackled in football. And please don't do either of those things. Oh my gosh, it's not good for your brain. It's very hard on your brain. Don't do that. Also, cerebrospinal fluid's there inside ventricles, and so it's puffing your brain out. So it makes your brain kind of float in the skull, if that makes sense. So it doesn't moosh back into itself. It's basically blood plasma. It's a little bit special, but it's basically blood plasma. Don't worry about this. We're gonna just skip it because we have other things to do. You make it from blood. It's basically blood plasma. This one I was talking about the other day. Hydrocephalus is when the cerebrospinal fluid doesn't drain properly. It'll happen in infants sometimes, but the skull's not fused yet, so just push their skulls out. But you can legitimately just put a shunt in it, and it'll drain into the belly, and you'll be fine. Last concept for today is the blood-brain barrier. Have you heard about that before? Oh, you're about to. The brain is hugely important, right? Super important. It knows it's important. Everybody knows it's important. It's great. That being said, it's also really needy. Very needy. Some parts of your body, your stomach, not super needy. Like, you can eat roadkill, you can eat rocks, you can eat leftover pizza that was on the counter for longer than it should have been, and your stomach's probably cool with it, right? Your brain feels picky. Feels very picky. You don't want to have sudden chemical variations in your brain because those chemical signals are what's telling your brain to fire, right? So you need it to be really tightly controlled. So, blood has a whole bunch of goo and stuff in it, right? You're gonna have drugs, you're gonna have pathogens, you're gonna have all sorts of random stuff. The blood-brain barrier means there's a lot of really tight junctions that keep a lot of blood stuff out. So to be able to get from, say, blood into neurons, it's got to go through the capillary walls. It's got to go through the basal lamina around the capillaries, and then it also has to go through the astrocytes. So the astrocytes are providing this other layer of protection, and they're kind of going to act as bouncers on what can come through and not. So you can still let oxygen through and stuff, but the astrocytes are going to take one for the team and keep other gunk out. Alright? The blood-brain barrier isn't perfect. It's selective, so it's going to let certain nutrients through. It's going to let, metabolic wastes through. It's some things it's not good at keeping out, even though it kind of wants to, and that's why alcohol, nicotine, and anesthetics act on the brain because they can pass through. But a lot of drugs don't pass well. So a lot of drugs, for Parkinson's, people want to have more dopamine in their system to treat Parkinson's. If you just give people dopamine, it can't cross the blood-brain barrier. It just won't fit. So what you end up doing is you end up feeding in the precursors for dopamine, so those can cross and the brain can handle it. But, a lot of things don't cross. The blood-brain barrier is all over the brain except in a couple very specific spots. So the vomiting center, the brain's right up next to where the blood is, and it can watch the blood very closely. So if it sees something it doesn't like a poison, it can trigger vomiting. And the hypothalamus also has a similar leakier barrier. So the hypothalamus can check the blood for, say, hormones. Questions, comments, concerns? The last little bit, the last half part is things that can go wrong. Basically, don't get hit on the head by bricks. And where you get hit in the head by a brick typically indicates where the problem's going to be. Sorry, I push buttons on my computer. Questions about this? Okay, the exam won't go beyond what we talked about today. Besides what's in your book, because I realize you all have been dutifully reading it. So that's all we have. Everybody knows what's going on today, besides me. Okay. If you haven't done your lab, do your lab, but most of you have done it. midterm grades are going in. If something's weird, let me know. On Thursday, you don't need to come to class physically because you have your online exam. Next Tuesday, we are in class. But then instead of having an in-person lab, we have our online lab.
Is there a test open at 9:25 until
Oh, Thursday?
the
How about... I realize this is dumb to ask, but like you all won't all communally take the test together and just cheat? Great. Would it make people's lives easier if I open it at like 12 a.m. and it closes at midnight?
yes.
Okay, I'm gonna do that for both of them. Don't make me have to explain to my boss how everybody has all the same answers on everything. Yeah? Okay. I'm actually not worried about this group. You're a good group. Sweet, yeah, so both of them will open all day. But do take it. Oh, my little freshmen, I worry about them. There's one of them who just every single week forgets to take the quiz, and I'm starting to really, really worry about her.